Hello students, today we're going to be talking about the urinary system and going through the urinary system study guide, filling it out from the PowerPoint on what I believe is going to be the most important things, which I will test you on the exam. First and foremost, I always like to think about the systems in the body in terms of something that you can more easily grasp onto. We talked about how the circulatory system is essentially the highway, where trucks will drive over delivering goods and services to wherever they need. That's where the GI system gives its micronutrients and macronutrients, which will travel around. The respiratory system is going to be your wind farm, where you get energy coming in through the oxygen. Lymphatic system is more or less system of warehouses and barracks for your immune system to actually take up residency and respond to it as your army. The urinary system. First, the main purpose is to filter the blood and remove waste. We talked about in the GI system, where that's where digestion and removal of physical waste is. Now we are using the urinary system to essentially drain some of that liquid waste. So I kind of like to think about this one as your water treatment plant, because the main job of the urinary system is to filter out that blood, keep as much of that good stuff, all the micronutrients, those monosaccharides, those sugars, those amino acids. You don't want to pee them out because your body has done so much work to keep it. In addition, I want you to take a guess at how much your kidneys filter a day. It's about 200 liters of fluid a day. Now, from that, it will keep about 198 liters of that, and you'll probably pee out 2 liters of that. And in those 2 liters, it's the water that's no longer needed because you have to have something to move it through, any waste and anything like that. But the system is so incredibly efficient at filtering massive amounts of liquid, and 2, retaining most of it. Because if you're thinking about it, you're only peeing 2 liters a day. Imagine if you had to pee out 200 liters a day. You would never leave the toilet. It would just be a stream in, stream out. Ugh. So let's get started on understanding how the urinary system does what it does. And we're going to be starting with anatomy first. So I have this over here, which is on page 9. I will also include it in the answer section right over here, but let's just take a little bit of a look at this. This is the overview of the urinary systems and structures. Now, you have 2 kidneys. They are located posteriorly on your back. So if there was ever a MMA fight or something and it's like a kidney shot, they hit you in the back. That's where they're located, because think about it, your small intestine and your large intestine is in the front. Now, they look like kidney beans. I don't know if kidney beans were first or the kidney was first in terms of the nomenclature, but they look incredibly similar to kidney beans. They have that nice little shape. And in terms of the organ major ones, before we get into like the microanatomy, you have your kidneys, you have your ureters, which are essentially just tubes that will bring out the filtered urine from the kidneys into the urinary bladder, which is essentially just a big old sac that will hold your urine to allow for controlled timing of urine release. Lastly, urethra, that's the tube that connects from your urinary bladder into the outside world. Now, another thing that we will be talking about very, very briefly is the adrenal glands. These are these 2 little triangle-shaped organs on top of the kidney. And I remember them as looking like little Robin Hood hats. And let's start detailing and defining some of what these things do and the areas in it. Now I'm doing it this way to try to reveal it to you. Let me know if you like this a little bit better than the other one. Regardless, we have 2 kidneys that are located under your diaphragm in terms of how it's separated into different areas. Posteriorly, look like kidneys, little tiny kidney beans. The main function is taking place in the kidney. So majority of this exam is going to be information regarding the kidney. If you only have one certain area, I'm telling you now, the bulk of it is going to be at the kidney. On top of it, you have those adrenal glands, and these glands are majorly? Yeah, they are mostly involved in the endocrine system. I'm sure with a name like adrenal, you can think about potentially what it's going to produce. Adrenaline. However, for this exam, you need to know about the hormone aldosterone, which is produced, as well as the two sections of the gland, meaning medulla and the cortex. The medulla is going to be on the outside, the cortex is going to be on the inside. We will essentially be showing that a little bit later once we get into the physiology, but for right now, just to start getting it through your mind. The ureters, tubes that connect the kidney to the urinary bladder. What could their purpose be? I've already spoiled it when I talk about it. It's essentially just moving that down. Urinary bladder, holding tank, and the urethra, the tube that connects the bladder to the outside to remove it from the body. So this is the first little beginning section of, hey, let's just have an overview of the system and what it's going to look like. So, like I said a little bit earlier, majority of your test is going to come from the kidneys. So let's just talk a little bit about the kidneys. The kidneys are divided up into three sections depending on microscopy. Now, you have your outermost, which is your cortex, your innermost, which is your medulla, the middle, which is the medulla, and the innermost pelvis. So, one more time. Outermost cortex, middle medulla, inner pelvis. How to remember that? Two different ways that I like. Outermost cortex, alphabetical. Middle, medulla, M for M. And then you have the pelvis or the cortex. So you can either remember it in terms of alphabetical, where it's C, N, P, or if you just remember, oh, the middle is the medulla, M for M, cortex, most people think of your brain cortex, that's up top, and your pelvis is lower than that. So just a few different ways to try to remember it. Now, if we want to just talk about what these things do and how to divide them up even further, the cortex and the medulla are responsible for urine-forming sections of the kidney. So the outer and the middle, its main thing is to get that blood in the filtrate and turn it into urine, essentially extracting all the good stuff from it and then leaving the rest. The pelvis is to drain the urine from the cortex and the medulla. So these two things are going to be responsible for a lot of the bulk of this exam and most of the work that goes on in the kidneys. And innermost, the pelvis, is just to drain the urine from the kidneys so that we can start getting it towards the outside of the body. Now, this is something that I talk about all the time, and it's really important to think about it when you're thinking about like the main functional unit or the most important section in the organ. For example, when we talked about the liver, it was a hepatocyte. When we talked about the respiratory system, I was like, hey, this respiratory membrane at the alveolar sac is going to be the most important thing that you're really going to need to know, and it's like the functional unit of that system in terms of what is done. For the kidney, I want you to know the nephron. This is where majority of everything is going to take place. This is where the kidney does most of its work, and this is when the blood turns into filtrate, turns into urine. Everything there is going to be happening at the nephron. So the nephron will be explained in detail once we get into the physiology section, but there is some terminology that I want to introduce to you so that you can start piecing it together, so once we go into the physiology, you'll have a leg up. Now, so the nephron will be explained, but it extends between the cortex and the medulla. So here, the outermost, remember, cortex, middle is medulla. The nephron is actually going to extend from the cortex through the medulla. Now, for right now, that's not important, but jog your memory and have it sitting there. The long globe-shaped renal corpuscle in the renal cortex. So if we're going to be zooming here in a little bit, because this is the functional unit, this is your nephron, you have a globe shape, renal corpuscle. You have a long renal tubule with some of the tubules dipping into the medulla. So you can see here, this is all renal tubule. You have some of it in the cortex. You have some of it in the medulla. That is going to be important. Why now? You could think about it. Look ahead if you want. But no, some of the renal tubule is in the cortex, some of it's in the medulla. The cone-shaped renal pyramids within the renal medulla, separated by renal columns. So if you look here, you can see this section is a renal pyramid. This section is a renal column. You can see the renal column extends further into the renal pelvis compared to the renal pyramid, which contains medulla. Here's a photo to better explain and visualize, and if you're looking at it on the PowerPoint, it's going to be on page 18. We're also now going to go deeper into the nephron, because if you can see here, there is a lot of stuff that's going on, and this is going to be the most important part of the exam. Now, the renal corpuscle, it's responsible for filtering the blood, and it's composed of two parts. Now, I'm pulling up this photo. This is a good photo to start looking at and some of the terms that you're about to see coming up, but you can see here, renal corpuscle, it's that capsule bow-shaped area. And you can see that there's a ton of blood that is going to be shunted into this section. Its main thing is for filtering the blood. It's comprised into two parts. You have the glomerulus, which is a loop of fenestrated capillaries. This makes them extremely leaky or permeable, and you have something called podocytes. If you go to the podiatrist or if you go get a pedicure, that's on your feet. Podo is feet, they look like little feet. But glomerulus is going to be this loop. The glomerular capsule was originally discovered by a scientist named Bowman, which is why it's called the Bowman capsule. It's double layered of epithelium, consists of an outer parietal layer and an inner visceral layer. Now, let's get a photo to look at. Here's the photo. It's on page 28 of your PowerPoint, but let's get a look. So we're at the beginning section of this nephron, and it's divided into the glomerulus, which right in here, it's all of this capillary, the efferent arterial, blood coming in, afferent, blood coming out. And you see this weird little sucker thing. If you've ever played Metroid, maybe something that looks familiar, but those are the podiocytes. They are essentially on top of it and working to be a filter. Remember, these are fenestrated capillaries, meaning that they are perforated, so they're more leaky than normal capillaries. They're supposed to be leaky on purpose. The podiocytes are assisting in filtering out the good stuff, but leaving in erythrocytes some of the plasma proteins and things of that nature. Because remember, if you have blood in the urine, something has gone wrong. Most of the time you don't have blood in the urine. Even though we're filtering about 200 liters a day, you rarely see blood unless there is an issue, and that's an issue that's going to be here. So, glomerulus, the loop of that fenestrated capillaries, the glomerular capsule, or Bowman's capsule. It's this double-layered sheath that essentially allows for filtration of blood. Now, here is essentially going to be this list of, I do it for every single exam. For the circulatory system, I talked about, okay, if you're starting at the superior vena cava, what's the path that blood cell has to take throughout the entire body before it gets back there? For food, hey, you have food entering into your mouth. Food in mouth, chop, 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 chop. It's now a bolus, swallowed through your esophagus into your stomach. In the stomach, it mixed together. It's called chyme. Leaves the stomach, small intestine, large intestine, out of the body. here. There's also another one, and this is the pathway through that we're going to talk about in a little bit. It's going to make a lot more sense once we talk about the physiology, but I want you to think about the path and how it turns from blood to filtrate to urine. So, blood is brought to the glomerulus at the Bowman's capsule, and that blood is then filtered. That filtered fluid is now called filtrate, and it enters the lumen of the renal tubule. Here's a picture here that we will walk through after explaining it. The first area of this renal tubule is the proximal tubule. It will go through the nephron loop, or called loop of Henle. Scientists have discovered it, Henle. The distal tubule, the collecting duct, the papillary duct, the ureters. Here is it without any of the explanations that I'm including in it, as well as adds the urinary bladder and urethra. So let's take a good look at this. You have your glomerular capsule, Bowman's capsule, the glomerulus. You have those podiocytes essentially allowing you to filter out that blood, and that leaving is filtrate. That filtrate then is going to enter the renal tubule, and that's divided up into sections. First section, proximal tubule. Proximal tubule, it's convoluted, you're going through it, you're going through it, you're going through it. Boom. We get this long loop that extends between the cortex and the medulla. This loop is the nephron loop, or loop of Henle. After you go through that loop, you come back up, and then you are now at the distal tubule. This is going to be important in a little bit later, but distal tubule. So proximal, distal. Then go through here. We have the collecting duct, the papillary duct. This drains into, if you see here, through the renal pelvis, the ureter, into the urinary bladder, until eventually the urethra. Now, last anatomy term in terms of knowing where things are and what they are and what's the points, we have the juxtaglomerular apparatus. It consists of macula densa cells and juxtaglomerular cells. It's found at the transition point between the ascending limb of the nephron loop and distal tubule. So, as we were talking about and showed right here, again, just to do another walkthrough, we have the glomerulus, where blood is filtered out and it's turned into filtrate. We go through the proximal tubule, the loop of Henle, and then right here at the distal tubule, where it loops back around and it's the closest it can be to the glomerulus. This is what we're talking about when we talk about this area right here, the juxtaglomerular apparatus. That's the transition point. So if we're seeing it right here on this photo, you can see the distal tubule and the glomerulus, or the Bowman's capsule. And here you have this layer of cells called the macula densa cells and the juxtaglomerular cells. And the whole point of this apparatus is to regulate blood pressure and glomerular filtrate rate. Again, we don't understand yet how the kidneys work and how this whole process is going to make that filtrate into urine. But know right here, this is going to be your stoplight. These cells, these juxtaglomerular apparatus, is going to be either green light or red light, which will control blood pressure and glomerular filtration rate. This is determining how fast or how much filtrate you're going to be producing and how much you're going to go through it. That is an overview of the anatomy of the urinary system. In the next one, we're actually going to be talking about the physiology behind it.